Good day, God's people, and welcome to Division 2 of Lesson 3 of the CAC Sunday School lessons for January to June 2023. In Division 1 last week, we had discussed how grace called and commissioned Abraham. In Division 2 today, we shall discuss grace sustains him, and we'll be looking at the sections A, God helps him on Hagar's saga, and B, grace helps him to pass Isaac's test. So section A, grace helps him on Hagar's saga. From Genesis chapter 16, we see that 10 years after Abraham and Sarai arrived in Canaan, they still did not have children, despite the promise that God had made them. It seemed that Sarah was losing hope that she could ever have a child. And in fact, she said, "The Lord has restrained me from having children." So she devised a strategy, which is to have her maiden Hagar have a child with Abraham on her behalf. And by the customs of the East at that time, there would be nothing wrong with that. Now, the Bible tells us that Abraham heeded the voice of Sarai and he slept with Hagar. However, God had made a promise to Abraham. Could it be that Abraham had also given up on God's promise and aligned with his wife to have children with Hagar? Abraham had walked with God up till now. He was called a man of faith. But where was Abraham's faith in this case? Our walk with God includes challenges that will test our faith. It's very easy to think up our own strategies than to wait for what we are not sure about. Now, the Bible tells us in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 12 that hope deferred makes the heart sick. But when the desire comes, it's a tree of life. Abraham and Sarai had desired a child for so long, and their longing had not been fulfilled. So can we justify their action? But let's look at the events that follow. These events show us that they had not made a good decision. Human efforts will always yield results that can be humanly expected. But when we want extraordinary results, we should depend on the extraordinary wisdom of God. So not long after Hagar conceived, reality dawned. Sarai saw herself despised by her maid, and she would have none of it. 13 years after Ishmael was born, Sarai still did not have a child. Abraham was 99. It was at this time that God changed the name Abram to Abraham and reiterated that Sarah was going to have a son. Abraham must have lost so much hope that he clearly expressed his disbelief to God. But God did not abandon Abraham for all that had happened. Even for his show of unbelief, he still restored Abraham, renewed his covenant with Abraham, and still fulfilled his purpose through the provision of Isaac. So when Hagar and her son posed another challenge, God intervened by asking Abraham to let them go. So God's grace helps us through our walk with him. We are not perfect, but he is, and he helps us. His strength is made perfect in our weaknesses. So section B, grace helps him to pass Isaac's test. So God gave Abraham the son of promise 25 years after God had called him. But God was yet to be done with his work in Abraham's life. He still put Abraham to the test. He tested Abraham with none other than the promised son Isaac. So is God going to be taking back his gift from Abraham? In Genesis chapter 22 and verse 3, what God said is, "Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, the son that you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you." We may not be able to explain the kind of pain that this may have cost Abraham and how much he may have prayed, just like Jesus prayed that, "Our Father, if it were possible, let this cup pass over me." But in verse 3, we are told that Abraham got up early the next morning, he saddled his donkey, and he took along 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place that God had designated. So Abraham chose to preserve his relationship with God over the gift that God had provided for him. So what are the choices that we make today? Do we neglect the Lord and seek after his blessings? Are the blessings that we have received from him, have they not become the reasons why we fellowship with him less? Of course, in the end, we see that God's intention for Abraham was not to take back Isaac. It was a test of faith for Abraham. If Abraham could have sacrificed Isaac, what more could he not sacrifice for God? So God may ask of us, for what we have in our hand, just for him to multiply it and give it back into our hands. So Abraham sacrificed one son, of course, in his heart, but he received many more generations of nations of people as the fruits of his seed. It was God's grace at work, sustaining Abraham in faith and elevating him to the position where God had planned for him. May we be sustained by grace in our walk of faith in God. In Jesus' name. Our lesson summary: God's grace is enough to sustain us in our walk with Him. And when we choose to consistently remain in obedience and submission to His will, we will experience the fullness of His blessings. It's been great having you tune in today. Hoping to have you around again in the coming week as we move on to the next lesson. God bless you.